Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, do you think I'm giving a talk on this subject because I have mastered myself? Yeah. Okay. So, but every time I study something enough to give a talk on it, I really learn. Not that I learned to master myself, I learned some more tools. I've got a really big toolbox, and I need all of them, I need all of them. So I'm always glad, because spiritual truth underlying is the same in all traditions, maybe not all, but okay, essentially the underlying truth is there. And we have different ways of expressing it. Even in Unity and Other New Thought, we have different ways. And we have our 5 principles, we have our 12 powers, and those are not separate or totally different from other paths, principles, at least that are comparable to New Thought. And one of those is the Toltec vision, the Toltec principles that Don Miguel Ruiz, who wrote the 4 agreements, exposed us to in the late 90s. That's when it came out. I don't think I read it quite that soon. And now this book is by one of his sons, Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., and it builds on his dad's work. Now, his dad wrote another book much later called The 5th Agreement with the other son, the brother. So they've all come up in this tradition since they were babies. So the sons, they know the principles and they've learned to live them. Or as I watched an interview with Miguel, we'll call the junior Miguel now, with Miguel, and he said there was a time when he rebelled against his dad's principles, right? But then there was a time when he came back and learned to walk that talk. So, the mastery of self. First of all, I want to say that I have notes on my phone, but it's not the only thing on here. So if I start saying something like sweet potatoes, avocados, dog food, you'll know I'm on the wrong page, okay? And if I say something worse than that, yeah, you really know I'm on the wrong page. All right, so as a reminder, we did a series on the 4 agreements in December with Reverend Cherie. I gave one of those 4 talks, and they are: be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, we've all got that one right, don't make assumptions, always do your best. Okay, those are the 4 agreements from the first book. In the other book, which I haven't read, but I read about it, the 5th agreement was be skeptical, but learn to listen. Oh, I love that. Yes, always been skeptical. Even though I believe many things, just because someone tells me something, I don't, or just because, even though I'm the queen of Facebook, if I read something on Facebook, I do not go, oh, that's got to be true. Now, I'm not one of the people who doesn't even believe Snopes. I usually go there and I usually believe it. Maybe they're lying. I don't know, but I usually believe them. They are fact finders, right? They say false or mostly true. Anyway, I don't always believe things, and I want to have some kind of something I can show as proof to myself that it's true, and I may not have that. So when I hear this as the 5th principle or agreement, I'm like, yeah, but learn to listen. Okay, that's it. That's the key. Learn to listen. Not while someone else is talking, you're thinking, what a load, or you're thinking what you're going to say to counter it, which is, a lot of these things are pretty normal human behaviors, but if we want to grow, continue to grow, we need to look at those pretty normal human behaviors and see what they're doing to our lives. Are they working? Are they enhancing our experience of life? If not, then we can examine them. And learn to listen is pretty good, pretty primary in being able to get beyond living in the ego of emotional reactions, okay? Which I'm in. I'm in the ego and emotional reactions. I've always been a very reactive person, but I'm learning all the time and, moving past that. But when I said pissed off this morning, you knew, because if I hear something and I think that it isn't fair or right, I have an emotional reaction. I don't go, well, that's a shame, but I'm rising above it. My first reaction is, dang, that ain't right. And that's how I feel. But maybe sometime I will be beyond that and I will just go, well, there's a blessing in there. I know there's a pony in there somewhere. But I'm not there yet. And that's why I need to read and study such work as this, The Mastery of Self. Now, I talked about the 4 agreements, and I do want to say right now something I read in this book that I want to declare. It was, I am responsible for what I say, but I am not responsible for what you hear. Okay. Yes, I read it in this book. And I believed it immediately. I wasn't skeptical about it at all. Okay. Now, there is a story that Miguel tells us at the beginning of this book, and it is about one of the dreams. Now, in this tradition of Toltec, and by the way, the Toltecs lived in central Mexico from the 10th to the 11th centuries, and they were killed off by drought and a succession of a succession of rulers who made bad decisions. So Tuesday, you know what to do. All right, so they were killed off, and but those who remained were dispersed among different tribes, and so the traditions were orally carried down, and that's how people such as this still know these traditions. So imagine for a moment that you're in a dream. In this dream, you find yourself at a huge party with thousands of people where you are the only sober person and everyone else is drunk. The other partygoers are in varying states of intoxication. A few people have had just 1 or 2 drinks and are only tipsy. Most fall into the realm of general drunkenness, and a handful are so drunk that they are making spectacles of themselves in all sorts of colorful ways. They may even have blacked out as their actions seem completely out of their control. Some of the people at this party are your friends and family. Some are acquaintances, but most you don't even know. You try to talk to a few people, but you quickly realize that their intoxication level has altered their ability to communicate clearly. It has clouded their viewpoint. You also notice that each person is experiencing the party differently, depending on his or her degree of drunkenness, and your interactions change with every drink they consume. The partygoers range from loud, outgoing, and merry to shy, quiet, and sullen. As the party rages on, you watch everyone alternate between the 2 ends of the spectrum, from happy to sad, excited to apathetic. They fight and make up, argue, embrace, and argue again, and you watch as this type of odd behavior repeats itself endlessly in cycles throughout the night. You realize that even though they are drunk, it's not the booze they crave more of, but rather the drama of the party. As the night continues, your interactions with the partygoers vary from person to person. While some are enjoyable, others have the potential to quickly turn volatile. Since their perception is clouded, the other partygoers react emotionally to situations that you can see are pure fantasy. For some of them, the dream has become a nightmare. Most important of all, it's clear that no one at this party knows this is all just a dream. Then it occurs to you that this is not a new party, but one you've attended before. At one point, you were just like them. You went through all the varying degrees of drunkenness, behaving exactly as those around you are now. You conversed through the fog of booze, joined the folly of the party, and let the intoxication guide your actions. Finally, it's clear to you that no one realizes that you're sober. They think you're still drunk, just like them. They don't see your path, only their own. They view you only as a distortion, projected by their alcohol-addled minds, not as you really are. They are also completely unaware of the true effect the liquor is having on them. Each is lost in his or her own dream of the party. They do not see how their interactions are no longer under their control. As a result, they continually try to entice you to join the drama of the party, to join the folly that their distorted perception has created. What will you do? Now, this is not really about alcohol, although, sometimes such things occur, but this is about the dream that we have all been domesticated to be in by our upbringing, by the beliefs that our parents taught us, that their parents taught them, that somebody taught somebody, or the beliefs that come through us, through our culture, especially now with the media the way it is. We believe a lot of things, and we might not examine our beliefs until we have a real reason to. I mean, if you're going along fine, or if you just do really love the drama, which I gotta admit, yeah, that's part of it for me. The drama sometimes, but not as much as it used to be. So we're in this dream, and for example, if Grandma told us to clean our plate, and we really didn't want to, but we knew that we were either going to be rewarded or punished for whether we did it or not. Many of us, at that time in life anyway, 4 or 5 years old, whatever, cleaned the plate. Not everybody, but most of us would learn to clean the plate because we didn't want the punishment. We wanted to be told that we're a good child. We wanted the love, right? And they'll love us if we do what they say and clean the plate. So some of us are still cleaning the plate. And it's an old rule. Clean your plate. And if we, not just me, of course, if we think it through, we know that really isn't necessarily a reasonable thing to do all the time, but it was rewarded at one time, so just keep doing it. That's just one example of many, many, many things, of course, that we are told are good in our culture, that we are rewarded for. Now, there comes a time, of course, in adolescence when we rebel against things like that. But we don't necessarily think or really examine our beliefs in adolescence. Most of us, we might just do the opposite. Whatever it was that, was considered a good thing to do in our families when we were little, some of us might just do the opposite and go hog wild. But not necessarily because we're learning to be on a new spiritual path, but we just know we want to do it differently. So we just do something different. But at some time in many of our lives, especially people who have come to Unity, we are here because we do know that we're on a spiritual path. And we do, at least in some moments, know that we are more than our egos. We aren't going to get rid of our egos, but we know that if we make decisions based on our reaction of the ego, the decision's probably made in fear. So we recognize that, and we're learning at least to be able to rise above those decisions that are made out of fear. Fear that I'm not as good as somebody else, fear that somebody's different and I can't handle that. A lot of different fears, okay? Now, in the tradition of the Toltecs, we hear voices in our head, at least I do, doesn't everybody? We hear voices, and the voice is like the narrator of our lives. And just to simplify, we have essentially two voices in this tradition. And one is the voice of the ally, which obviously is going to help us. If we hear that voice, it's going to be helping us, leading us to make better choices, because everything's really about the choices we make. The other voice is the parasite, and known as the parasite because it feeds off our need for whatever, fear, drama, anger. And so if we listen to that voice, then our choices are going to be based on those things: fear, hurt, drama, anger. Now, we're going to have those things in our lives. And so if we pretend that we don't, I don't know, something happens. I don't know. Something happens. If we pretend there's no hurt, anger, and drama and we shove it away, it'll come out somewhere, okay? Different ways in different lives. So we acknowledge that. We acknowledge the ego. We acknowledge that there are things we're afraid of, and we examine them. We examine them to see where that came from, where in our past. Okay, somebody pushes my buttons. Is that really about what they just did or said? Not likely. That's just the trigger, right? So sometime in my past, something happened, and I had a reaction to it. And if I don't examine and re-examine and practice things differently, I will have a reaction to something similar to that all my life. Okay. So if I am willing to know that this fear is from the voice of the parasite, this fear is from something in my past, not the current happening, and if I can recognize that and go back and look at where this may have come from, then I can make another choice. I can choose to hear the voice of the ally. I can choose to experience things differently and not come from fear. But if I don't examine it, then that's the way it is, because I have to look at who I am and what I am. And in our domestication, which is what has happened to us to fit into the culture, or to fit into our family, or to fit into anything, maybe to fit into unity even, our domestication of unexamined beliefs anyway, we have attachments. And if we are attached to a person, an idea, a theme, a sports team, whatever it may be, something we identify with, not necessarily bad, something to look at, something to be aware of. If I think that's my identity, I'm one of the few non-sports people in Lawrence, Kansas, so I'll just use myself as an example. If I don't identify with sports, then that's just not one of the masks I choose to wear. And we all choose to wear masks. They're not wrong or bad, they're just ways that we deal with certain aspects of our lives. Like if I'm going to see my mom, I might be wearing a different mask. I won't be giving her a talk, because she has dementia and she really doesn't want to hear it anyway. And but if I am teaching a class, I might wear a different mask, giving a talk. If I'm at my school crossing guard job, I'm not giving lectures and talks and things to the kids as they cross the street, So we wear different masks, and they're not wrong. If I were a KU basketball fan, like many, many, many of my friends, then part of my identity would be that mask. Not a fake thing or bad, just an aspect of my personality would be that I identify as, okay, you're a basketball fan. And when they lose, what do I feel? Ooh, because I'm attached. That's how sports is one of the examples. Politics, yes. If my candidate loses, how do I feel? Bad. Because, yes, I am attached in that sense. And if we had no attachments, we probably wouldn't even be able to function here on earth. But to be aware of our attachments, to know this is not who I really am, but this is an aspect of my personality. But I have a voice in my head that I can call the ally. I have a voice that I can call the parasite. And neither of those is actually my authentic self, my true self. My authentic self, those are both functions of my personality, but my authentic self is what in unity we call the Christ within, or the Buddha within, or the inner teacher, the higher self, many, many different names. But it is the divinity within us. And it is also our authentic self. So if we want to confuse the children even further when we bless them, instead of saying divinity, we'll say, we behold the authentic self within you. But it's all the same thing, right? It's all the same thing. It is the Christ within. It is the divine within us. So as we practice being aware of our attachments, as we practice looking at where they may have come from in our past, being aware that, yes, we have been domesticated, and yes, we wear many masks, and they are just parts of us, they aren't wrong, but none of this is our entire self. Our entire authentic self is actually more than we can comprehend. Just like we say, what is God? Well, whatever we think God, the divine, is more than that, is more than we can comprehend. And is certainly more than an old man who is up there taking score. That's part of our domestication if we're still there. And some people want to be there, and some people want to believe that, and they need to. But if we're in unity, we probably don't, or we wouldn't be here. So we learn about attachments, we learn about our domestications, and when we realize that someone taught us something as a rule long ago, and that we have continued it ourselves, then we have self-domesticated. We are continuing it ourselves, not just because mom or dad or teacher said, this is the way, this is true, this is the right way to be. But we have continued it. So we learn to practice by identifying our attachments, and then, once we have been doing that, we can work on the antidote for all of this, unconditional love for ourselves. If I don't have unconditional love for myself, then I can't really have it for you. And I'm not really there, to tell you the truth. I don't really have unconditional love. If you tell me something, I'm not yet ready to behold the Christ in you and accept you no matter what you've said to me, because I still am struggling with the human emotions and reactions, as I said before. And I might in some moment be able to do that, but the honest truth is I don't go around being able to do that. Some people do, I'm sure, or they do in more moments of their lives than I. But that is what we're here for, is to learn to do that, to learn to be able to be present with someone, and no matter where they are, no matter what their belief is, that to accept them and recognize their right to have that belief and not to have an emotional reaction. Now that sounds pretty perfect to me, and I won't ask you to raise your hand if you can do that, because I probably think you're lying. But nobody would lie in church. Okay. But that's what we are here to learn. right? And that is the part of when we had our Shadow to Light program, and we talked about a world that works for all. The more people who can do this, who can see the divine in another, regardless of who they are, what they're doing, what their beliefs are, the more people that can do that, yes, that is how we approach a world that works for all. And it's not what I see happening today. If some people might, fine, but it's not what I see happening today. So we practice unconditional love for ourselves, meaning we spot and release the episodes of listening to the parasite, of making choices based on fear, making choices based on someone else might get something I want, or I might not get, whatever it might be. Or just, I disagree with that person, so they're, stupid, bad, I don't know. But instead of saying that is a divine child of God who has a different belief than I. If I can do that, then I am approaching unconditional love. But if I'm still saying that is someone who has crazy thoughts and I don't really want them in my life, then I'm listening to the parasite and I'm having conditional love. And much of the love in our world is conditional love. People do what I want, okay, then I'll love you. But if you don't, then I don't love you anymore. So unconditional love, no matter what you do, I love you. And I hope some of you do experience that more often than I. Good for you, because I plan to continue working on my path to experience it more and more. So spotting and releasing the voice of the parasite, and that takes practice, lots of practice. And then with even more practice, actually changing that voice to one of an ally. Becoming aware when we're having the negative self-talk, when we're thinking that we aren't quite as attractive as someone else or quite as smart as someone else, whatever. That is part of our domestication, that we aren't quite good enough, which isn't true. It's part of our dream. We each have our own dream that is what we live with our beliefs, and then we all contribute to the dream of the planet, which is the cultural dream, the cultural beliefs that are going on in our country and in the world. So, in the dream of the planet, a lot of times it's a world of polarities because we know things in relation to the opposite. Like we know light because we know dark. We know down because we know up, night, day, and so forth, hot and cold. So we know these things based on what we've been taught and our own perception. So I might think someone is a good person or that something is good, and someone else can think it's a bad person or something is bad. And we're both right and wrong because we're looking at it from our own perception, from our own personal dream. And we don't know what the real truth is anyway. So a master of self, someone who is able to transcend all these attachments and know that they're in a dream, but they're now awake, knows the power of the word. And there we go back to the 4 agreements too, the power of the word. And that every single judgment that the parasite utters, you're not good enough, that person is wrong, I don't have enough, he has too much, whatever. We know that can be transformed and become an ally. And the way we do it is to have self-love unconditionally. So I am willing to have unconditional self-love. I am willing to accept myself, my body, my behaviors, my beliefs as they are, and allow them to change. Well, especially the body. Oh no, that was the parasite. Okay, allow them to change, give space for them to change, but accept them. Because every time we look in the mirror and say, oh God, that's the parasite, you know. I am who I am, and I am more than my ego. I am more than my body. But yes, I have a body. I live in it for now. So we can change the things that trigger us. We can change the things that have hurt us by practicing self-acceptance, practicing being awareness of attachments and of our domestication. And once we have gone through that, then we can offer unconditional love to others. We can still love others, but just with the awareness that if I don't truly love myself, then what I'm offering others, it really isn't unconditional love. It can't be. I have to be able to accept who I am. This is according to this book. You might read some other book, and you might believe differently. That's fine. But it makes sense to me. I have to accept myself fully in order to accept you fully. And otherwise, I'm projecting something that is from the parasite thought, something onto you that is mine. And I need to be aware of that so that I can. So we can train our mind to see through the eyes of the ally. Practice seeing through the eyes of the ally. That's how we learn unconditional self-love. For some people, they might just have an experience and they're there. That happens. But for most of us, it really is like, how do you get to Carnegie Hall?
Practice.
Thank you. I thought everybody would say practice, 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 but thank you. And that's how do we get to unconditional self-love? Practice, practice, practice. Yes. Practicing hearing the voice of the ally. And when we don't hear it, switch channels so that we do. So here is a person's story, a woman named Heather Ash Amara, who has written a book called Warrior Goddess Training. Heather Ash Amara, Warrior Goddess Training. She works with Miguel Jr. All right, so this is something from her book about her childhood. First is her perspective as told through the eyes of the parasite. I was traumatized as a child by how often my family moved. I went to 8 different schools and lived in 4 countries, Singapore, Hong Kong, the United States, and Thailand, by the time I was 16. We would move every 2 years or so, and I started off at each school feeling painfully shy, disconnected and alone. By the second year, I would have made friends and found my group, but then we would move again, and the cycle would start over. Because of the many times I moved away from friends, I have a hard time connecting with people intimately, and I'm afraid of being abandoned. Okay, so she says, every time I told my story, I felt depressed. So, after she became an apprentice of Don Miguel Sr., she began to see and tell her story through the eyes of the ally. Notice the shift in perspective based on the same facts. I was blessed as a child with an